Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our first listening session on wildfire adapted communities. Tammy, if you would mind going to the next slide. I'm Kim Marshall. I'm one of our facilitators this evening, and I'm just going to provide a couple instructions. Next slide, please. As the Zoom pop-up should have said, this session is being recorded. Your mics are automatically muted as the default, but we want to encourage you to engage and participate. So you can always use the raise hand feature, use the chat as well. If you would like to turn on the closed captioning, you are welcome to do so. There's automatic closed captioning. You just need to click the button that says live transcript in the bottom of your screen. We'll also be using polling and breakout rooms this evening. Next slide, please. To use the chat, again, there's a button in the bottom middle of your screen for chat that'll bring up that window. Feel free to introduce yourself to the group, give us your name or an organization that you work with. And next slide. To raise your hand to be able to speak, you'll just use the reactions button in the bottom and just click raise hands, and we will call on you. This is just to ensure that we have a more orderly meeting and folks aren't interrupting or talking over one another. So thank you very much for using that raise hand feature. And next slide, please. So I've just gone through the instructions. I'm going to turn it over to Susan Milhauser from DLCD in just a second to do welcome and introductions. We'll do a land acknowledgement. We'll have some brief polling. Susan will give us a project overview. We will then break out into breakout rooms and then come back together for next steps at the end of the night. And next slide. So Susan, turning it over to you.
Great, thanks, Kim. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Good evening, my name is Susan Milhauser, and I'm a natural hazards wildfire planner with the Department of Land Conservation and Development and the staff lead for the Wildfire Adapted Communities Project. We're so glad to see so many people here tonight who are interested in this important topic and look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas tonight. DLCD truly appreciates the time you're taking to participate in this effort, and we hope that you'll feel like it was time well spent. I'd like to introduce Sadie Carney with DLCD, who will be reading the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Susan. Pardon my dog in the background if anyone can hear that. I'd like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory and honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call Oregon. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together.
Thank you, Sadie. Next, Commissioner Stewart Warren, a member of the Land Conservation and Development Commission, will offer some opening remarks. Commissioner Warren represents Southern Oregon and joined the commission in October 2020. He was not able to join us in person tonight, so we'll be sharing his remarks by video.
Oh, a little glitch.
Hi there, I'm Stewart Warren from the Land Conservation Development Commission. I'm originally from Ashland and live down in Southern Oregon where wildfire has been a challenge for many years. I've served on the Land Conservation Development Commission for 2 years, and before that, I was on the City Council in Phoenix, Oregon. I was a City Councilor when Phoenix was devastated by the Alameda Fire in 2020. In just a few hours on a September afternoon, what started as a wildfire turned into an urban conflagration and claimed more than 1,200 homes, including many manufactured homes, and 100 commercial buildings in Phoenix and our neighbor Talent. Oregon lost more than 2,600 homes and 170 commercial structures to that one fire. So sadly, I have firsthand experience in the community impacts of wildfire and wildfire recovery. I want to start by saying thank you. I'm truly glad you're here today. At DLCD, one of our biggest goals is to hear from all voices in a community in all areas of the state. Wildfire affects each and every Oregonian. It could be through lost business revenue, poor health, evacuation or home loss, or the tragic loss of life. You being here today and adding your voice and your views to this conversation will help us make strong recommendations about how we plan for wildfire and what we do to prepare for a future with wildfire. The results can make a real difference for Oregon. My hope is that together we can create wildfire adapted communities that are healthy and safe, where our homes are protected. Communities that are prepared and resilient to wildfire, places that we can all thrive. I'm sorry I can't be there in person today, but I wanted to be sure you knew I appreciate the time you are taking to participate in this process. Your views and your voice are so important. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Warren, and we'll move into, we've got a couple questions to get to know who's in the room this evening. So our first question is an easy one. What part of Oregon do you live in? You should see the poll come up on your screen. Okay, looks like we've got 80% of folks. So unsurprisingly, good representation from the Willamette Valley and Oregon Coast tonight, and also quite a few coming in from the Portland metro area, myself included, so hello. Our second question is, how would you describe where you live? And feel free to select more than one if more than one answer applies. Okay, we've got 85%. Good representation from around, quite a few folks in the city, but also several in small towns and rural, and someone in other. If you wouldn't mind sharing what other is in the chat, we'd love to hear about other folks that are in the room. And our third question, we've all been impacted by wildfire in this state. Please share with us how wildfire has impacted you and select any that apply.
Kim, you might tell people they can scroll down on this one.
Yes, there are quite a few options, so you can scroll down. I know there's a lot of options. I think give folks a little bit more time to reply. I'm gonna end the poll. Unsurprisingly, we've all been impacted strongly by wildfires, both in air quality, mental health impacts. Folks have been evacuated or impacted by structure loss. Our deep sympathies are with those who have lost their homes and been impacted. And thank you for your work on that wildfire response and recovery work. So that ends our polling questions for this evening, and I will turn it back over to Susan for our project interview overview.
Thanks, Kim, and thanks everybody for participating in the poll. It's helpful for us to know who we're talking with tonight. So now I'm going to spend a few minutes sharing a project overview. If you have any questions about the background on the project, please put them in the chat and we can address them shortly. Next slide, please. Here's some information about the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Our mission is to help communities and people plan for, protect, and improve the built and natural systems that provide a high quality of life. In partnership with community members like you all and local governments, we foster sustainable and vibrant communities and protect our natural resources legacy. Next slide, please. DLCD's Wildfire Adapted Communities Project is in response to Senate Bill 762, passed by the Oregon legislature in 2021. Senate Bill 762 is a comprehensive wildfire preparedness and resiliency bill that takes a proactive approach to help modernize and improve wildfire preparedness through 3 key strategies: creating fire adapted communities, developing safe and effective response, and increasing the resiliency of Oregon's landscape. And DLCD's focus is on the first item. Next slide, please. So the legislation requires action from multiple state agencies with the aim of providing long-term security for our state by minimizing loss of life and property, protecting the lives of firefighters, protecting and managing Oregon's forest assets, and creating a more predictable and protected future for communities and development at risk to the impacts of wildfire. The Wildfire Programs Director, Doug Graff, in the Governor's Office, and the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council are responsible for coordination and oversight. DLCD's work is closely aligned with the work of Oregon Department of Forestry, which is responsible for the wildfire risk map, the Oregon State Fire Marshal, which is responsible for defensible space code updates, and the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs, responsible for updates to building codes and home hardening. Other agencies are focused on community risk reduction, public health, air quality, and utilities. Next slide, please. In terms of the work of the Oregon Department of Forestry, Senate Bill 762 provided legislative direction to the Board of Forestry regarding the wildland-urban interface and the statewide wildfire risk mapping, among other requirements. Oregon Department of Forestry initiated a rulemaking process in 2021 to guide this work. The final map will be available June 30th of this year and will include wildland-urban interface, or WUI, boundaries and fire risk classes, and will be updated to reflect current wildfire risk every 5 years. So we know a lot of folks are interested in the mapping, and we are too. So we're excited to see what that looks like. Next slide, please. So under Section 11 of Senate Bill 762, which is the land use section, DLCD is tasked with identifying recommendations for updates to the statewide land use planning program and local comprehensive plans and zoning codes needed to incorporate the wildfire risk map and minimize wildfire risk. The recommendations must include appropriate level of state and local resources necessary for effective implementation and may allow for regional differences. Next slide, please. The recommendations may also include, but are not limited to, provisions regarding sufficient defensible space, building codes, safe evacuation, and development considerations in areas of extreme or high wildfire risk, again, allowing for regional differences. Next slide. DLCD's report is due by October 1st to the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council and the legislature. The council may then advance refined or additional recommendations to the legislature as part of their regular reporting to the legislature. During the 2023 legislative session, the legislature may direct DLCD to undertake additional work. Next slide, please. So the purpose of tonight's listening session is to get input from you all on how to address wildfire risk in state and local land use planning programs. Your ideas and feedback will inform DLCD's recommendations to the council and legislature. These listening sessions are part of a larger engagement process through which we're aiming for broad participation and to engage underserved Oregonians. We have multiple opportunities for involvement, including an online open house and survey, the formation of a stakeholder advisory group, and other outreach methods. We're also in consultation with tribal governments, and we'll talk a little more about this when we get to next steps. Next slide, please. So here is a brief overview of wildfire trends in Oregon from Wildfire Programs Director Graff. As you can see, there's been a doubling of area burned over each of the last 3 decades. The trends are not looking good. Next slide, please. Also, the locations of where wildfires have burned has expanded across much of the state, as shown on this and the following 2 maps. If you want to click through those, Kim. Thank you. Great. And then lastly, this satellite imagery from NASA captures the devastating 2020 wildfires in Oregon. Smoke from wildfires and the associated health and economic impacts are just one way that all Oregonians have been impacted by wildfires. In addition to the devastating loss of life, homes, and businesses, other significant social, economic, environmental implications include loss of infrastructure, cultural resources and tourism, transportation and power interruptions, and negative impacts to watersheds, wildlife habitat, timber, agriculture, and recreation. So now I will turn it over to Libby for an introduction to the breakout rooms.
Thank you, Susan. Next slide, Tammy. So we are going to work off of two discussion questions. One, how do we protect what we have? And the way to think about that is what additional measures are needed in areas that are already developed. The second question, we're looking into the future and we're asking, how do we plan for growth? How are we planning for growth and new development in areas that are not already built out? Next slide. There are three potential solution buckets that are in DLCD's realm of responsibility: statewide land use planning program updates, local comprehensive plans and zoning code updates, funding, research, partnership. Just because those three buckets exist doesn't mean that we don't want to hear all the ideas. There are ideas and brainstorming that maybe don't fall neatly into these buckets, and we would like to hear those. The next slide. And again, recommendations can include, but are not limited to, provisions about sufficient defensible space, building codes, safe evacuations, and development considerations. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Marshall. She's going to magically put us into our discussion rooms or help us get there.
Yes, I will. So we have two breakout rooms set up. One is specifically for the Oregon coast and Willamette Valley, and then one is just Willamette Valley, given the folks that we have attending here tonight. When I open the rooms, you'll be given the option to select either one. If you're in the Willamette Valley, please try to keep the numbers somewhat consistent. If you see like a room looks a little low with folks. If you're in the Oregon coast, please join the Oregon coast room. When you get into that breakout room, Libby and I will be facilitating. If you have any issues getting into a breakout room, the menu doesn't pop up. Chris and Martin are on this call, and they'll be able to help get you into whichever room that you are aiming for. So
I was going to say, and if you're not, if you're here, because it's open to everybody, if you're not from in the Willamette or the Oregon coast, pick a room. Probably the coast room is probably the best place.
Thank you, Libby. Good point.
Mm-hmm.
And I will open up the breakout rooms. All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. Looks like we just probably still a few more folks who are going to be joining us, but welcome to the Willamette Valley and Oregon Coast Breakout Room. I'm Kim Marshall, and I'll be facilitating today. With me is Tammy Minkerud, also from Barney and Worth, and she'll be taking notes on our discussion board. We also have some representatives from DLCD in the room with us. I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves, starting with Lisa.
Sure. I'm Lisa Phipps. I'm the Coastal Policy Specialist for the department and acting as the North Coast Regional Rep.
And Hui.
Kim. Hi, everyone. I'm Hui Rodomsky. I'm the South Coast Regional Rep with DLCD. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have Susan, who we've introduced previously, with us as well. So please use the chat. We're a pretty small group, so no need to kind of raise hands. I think we should be okay to offer suggestions, ask questions. When you're speaking, if it's your first time speaking, please introduce yourself and where you are coming from. We'll have about 35 minutes to do this brainstorming activity. Then we'll reserve a couple minutes at the end to talk about some of the most important ideas that have come out of this conversation. We're here to collect your ideas and suggestions about ways to address wildfire risks in the state and local land use planning. Are there any questions? So we are using what is essentially an online whiteboard to address those two questions that Libby had talked about earlier. How do we protect what we have, and how do we plan for growth? Does anyone have any suggestions, thoughts, solutions that you'd like to share? Don't be shy. Susan, maybe you'd like to share some examples of possible solutions that your team's been thinking about.
Sure. I mean, there is, when we're looking at the land use planning program at the state level and also at the local government level, some of the things, there's also best practices, in Oregon that are already in place and in other places across the country. But we have talked about things like looking at, in terms of how we plan for growth, are there ways we can consider wildfire hazard more specifically when we're looking at where growth is planned? So when we're looking at urban growth boundary amendments, when we're looking at calculating housing need, how does wildfire risk, in particular the extreme and high hazard areas, how does that potentially impact where we have an opportunity for future development?
Thank you, Susan. Does anyone have thoughts on statewide solutions, specifically around land use planning program updates that could be implemented to protect what we have in the state? Lisa or Hui, do you have any thoughts about things that you're currently working on that might fall in some of these solution buckets that might be worth sharing?
I would also add that Marian Lahav is on the meeting, and she's in our natural hazards program. So definitely ask her too. I guess I'm trying to think both simple and big. So just to give folks kind of started. So, I can't see the whole screen, but if I'm recalling correctly, it just says statewide land use planning program updates. So even just guidance to local communities for best practices for individual landowners, is something that is a tool that we're working on and is going to be really valuable. But it can be that simple, or it can be, revamp the entire goal 7 and make it include everything has fire related, right? So I mean, think both small and big and anywhere in between, if that helps people kind of get their creative juices going.
For anybody in this room who isn't as familiar with the goals as I know the planners are, could you talk about goal 7?
Yeah, goal 7 is I should have Marian do this. This is her goal. Goal 7 is around natural hazards. So in that goal, you're going to find flooding, landslides, tsunamis, earthquakes, and wildfire, of course. So Marian has been intimately involved in these conversations. So I'll let her explain if she'd like to go into more detail.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, thank you, Lisa. So goal 7 asks local governments to consider the hazards that they have and to go through a public process to determine how to best protect their communities.
Thank you, Marian.
We also have a chat.
Oh, we do. So Stephanie says in the chat, I think consistent communication and how can we better reach community members? And Stephanie, would you like to speak at all about that?
Sure. My name is Stephanie Stafford. I work at the Oregon Office of State Fire Marshal. My position was hired, or I'm in my position because of Senate Bill 762. And I do cover 6 counties in Oregon. So I think just there's a lot, I think, overall with Senate Bill 762, as I start to speak with community members where they don't understand, you know, what is going on with Senate Bill 62. They understand there's a lot of money backing it, but who has the money? Is it available to community members? So I think it's just consistent communication, or how do our agencies work together to better collaborate and, you know, share information, and I don't know, just overall, how do we reach the public? I think a lot of times we're used to communicating with our partners, but how do we start reaching out to the public to communicate what is going on with all of this? So probably not just this topic, but a lot of Senate Bill 762.
Thank you for the clarification, Stephanie. And Mary Kyle, I see your hand.
Hi, I'm Mary Kyle McCurdy with 1000 Friends of Oregon. And I'm also on the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council of the state. And I joined mostly to listen, but I thought I'd help get some ideas out there, since I think there's maybe only 3 of us that are not with a state agency in this room. So, so I have lots of ideas, but I would think some minimum ones are, you know, as I'm fairly certain that there have been no rules adopted to interpret and implement Goal 7. And I think that a starting place would be, just like on the coast, there are tsunami signs everywhere. People who live on the coast or are visiting the coast should know whether they're in a tsunami zone and where the evacuation routes are if there is a tsunami warning. We don't have that for wildfire risk. And I think when we have the maps for the high and extreme wildfire risk areas, that is a minimum, so that communities know the risk that they're in and communities, families, individuals, and can plan accordingly, from everything from a family evacuation plan to evacuation routes in communities. And then I think that information should influence whether to allow building at all in some areas, just like on some steep slopes, we don't allow any kind of building. And if building is allowed, under what circumstances. So that's just a few ideas to kick it off. And going back to what Stephanie said about communication, we learned from the 2020 wildfires that communication didn't work really great in Southern Oregon, and that it's critical to have a robust and redundant communication system in multiple languages.
There's some great points. I especially like the idea around, we have tsunami signs everywhere, and putting something together that's similar for wildfire evacuation. I was in Lincoln City over the weekend, and I saw all those signs. How do other folks feel about some suggestions that have been brought up around signage, maps, evacuation routes, increasing communications? Are these also solutions that you feel are some of the important ones that need to come to the state?
This is Hui. My reaction to the evacuation route signs is that unlike tsunami, where we know where the water is going to be, how high elevation, I think it might be our detriment if we say here is the route, but then the fire comes here, how do we know it's not going to come here? So I think we have to be sure that those routes are actually going to be available when the fire comes near, because like I said, it's not just how high you have to run to for tsunami. Mm-hmm. It's more, moves around a bit more than that.
I agree. And I think this, Mary Kyle, that it just means ensuring there's more than one way. It might not be available or anything, but we know from the fires, not just in the recent years, but there are place, that there was only one route in and out, and other alternatives weren't well signed. So the communication would have to be as a fire is coming, which routes might be available. But one route in and out of some communities isn't going to be sufficient. So I understand it's much harder to predict than with a tsunami.
And then my other thought, which kind of goes to the other solution, or maybe partnerships, is the abandoned area, they have gorse, which is invasive plant that is highly flammable, and there are multiple partners in the area who's been trying to eradicate this invasive species for, I don't know, maybe 100 years, because the town's burned down twice because of gorse, fueling fire. So even just getting rid of that plant in the area would help the abandoned area from wildfire devastation. Thank you.
Thank you, Hoy. That was a great insight. Susan, please.
Yeah, I was just thinking along the lines of the conversation with evacuation routes, and this maybe falls more in future planning, but there's some examples from up the Mackenzie River of properties where the fire didn't necessarily impact, but they're looking at redevelopment opportunities. But the access or egress is not great, but we might be looking at recommendations or when folks are redeveloping properties, like, are there shared access agreements with neighboring properties that they could look at that might provide access across a neighboring property? So really looking at that evacuation in a more holistic manner. And there were also some examples from Detroit, from Detroit, where there were folks who were trying to evacuate. They ended up, and forgive me if I don't get all the details right, and if anyone was more involved, correct me, but the folks ended up on a dock at the lake, and then they ended up coordinating with emergency responders and were able to connect with Forest Service staff who were able to unlock certain roads to allow them to leave the area when the other roads were not passable. And so if there's a way that we can have encourage, local and county governments to try and have those communication channels and agreements open, beforehand, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, preparing more in advance, knowing what we've learned from other fires. So we have, I'd like to invite either Alan or Pam, or we've someone on the phone. *6 will unmute you if you're on the phone, or if you'd like to share. Hi, Rusty. Welcome to the Oregon Coast and Willamette Valley Breakout Room. We are thinking solutions and thoughts around how we can protect what we have and plan for growth in adapting our communities to wildfires.
Thank you. This is James Edwards, Mayor of the City of Lakeside.
Hello, Mayor.
Hi there. So in our city of Lakeside, we are somewhat protected because we have a marine layer of marine. However, can you folks hear me?
Yes, you're breaking up a little bit, but we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm getting some kind of feedback on my phone, but so because we are somewhat protected by a marine layer, we don't have quite a high risk, but it is conceivable that because we're surrounded on three sides by the Elliott State Forest, that we could have a wildfire situation which would affect our town. But also, we're bordered on the east by 10 Mile Lake, and then beyond that is the Elliott State Forest. There's about 600 homes around the 10 Mile Lake that, although they're outside the city limits, they're still considered to be a part of our community. And a lot of those homes, most all of those homes, will be very vulnerable to a wildfire. The concern I after listening to the signs that you were suggesting putting up as escape routes, my biggest concern is most of the roads that lead down to these houses are one-way roads. There's no way out except jumping in the lake, which I suppose most people would do. They would get in their boats and leave. But in the event that some people didn't have boats or couldn't get to their boats, and they would be basically stuck at the end of a dead-end road. So how do we address educating these people about fire danger out there, and what kind of a plan can we implement other than working with our county emergency manager people that during the fire season, people need to be highly aware of wildfire situations.
Thank you for that insight, Mayor. And the information around your town. I definitely hear loud and clear the theme coming through about greater communication to folks living in these wildfire risk areas, and needing to do that communication around possible evacuation routes, making sure that folks understand during fire season what the risk to their community is. It's definitely been spoken to pretty strongly so far this evening. Alan or Pam or Rusty, would you like to chime in?
Well, we do have
Yes.
the Coos Forest Protection. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Everyone, I just wanted to go ahead. Let you know we've been in the room for about 15 minutes, so you have about 20 minutes left.
Thank you, Chris. Sorry, go ahead, Rusty, and then we'll switch back to the mayor.
Yeah, I work with the Umpqua National Forest quite a bit, doing trail maintenance, things like that, also guiding, having property in the Umpqua National Forest and working with their fire science people, things like that. Now, at least in the Cascade region, slightly different scenario over on the Coast Range. Lakeside's just west of us, really, kind of. Our historical fires were spanning in about 60 years. The average natural fire was happening in our region about every 60 years. And with the climate changing, it's now up to about 40, which is that of what kind of Eastern Oregon is dealing with right now. So what we're currently dealing with right now is, now I might be, preaching to the choir, but we've had over a century worth of fire suppression in most of our forests in the Cascades. A lot of the communities, for lack of education on the importance of forest fires and how ecologically important they are for our systems out here, they're just afraid. The communities, they think that if the fire crews allow a burn to continue and work naturally in the undergrowth, they think they're not doing their jobs. And one of my friends, he's the fire science specialist. He just moved to Eastern Oregon, but he was working Umpqua National Forest. And he said, we as the Forest Service are lacking in community education on the importance of wildfires in our ecosystem. He said other forests have programs from kindergarten to 12th grade teaching the community about our ecosystem and the importance of these fires. So, and I've been up in the Willamette region quite a bit as well. And if you go up into the Cascades in the Umpqua National Forest, there's places you can't even walk through. It is so overgrown. And our Archie Fire or Jack Creek complex that we had this past summer, if it would have jumped a quarter mile to the west, it would have been an explosion because some of these forests are so overgrown. And I don't know if our Department of Agriculture is going to be a little more proactive on community awareness concerning this. Also, a lot of these areas, the community doesn't want people to do prescribed burns, things like that. I heard the Willamette region is going to have some camera club or something like that. You know, we're just repeating history, really. In the 20s and 30s, put crews out all over in the forest to ride out and stop fires. That's about all the cameras are going to do. You know, what we need to do is implement fuel mitigation and controlled burns, thinning to a historically accurate ecosystem instead of densely packed. Is resetting itself basically with these huge fires we're having. So I don't know, I missed out on the earlier part of the meeting or what have you, but I don't know if there is like a 50-year plan that's going to happen, because the fires aren't going away. And I think the sooner the community realizes that and adapts appropriately to really implement these fires into their land management practices. That's my 25 cents worth.
Thank you for sharing, Rusty. Still, that same theme still is coming through very strongly. Public communication and education around the importance of controlled burns. And yes, Pam, I saw your hand.
I came in late. I was working on my taxes and got frustrated. So I'm here because I live north of Corvallis in a small valley of about 7 miles. We have 600-year-old Douglas fir at the head of the valley. This valley was burned by the Calpooya when they owned this land, when they lived on this land. And I'm a member of Benton County CERT, and my whole idea, and I fought forest fire. My dad was in the Forest Service, and I fought back in the 60s and 70s. My whole emphasis right now is being able to evacuate the 220 people who live out here and get them out safely with their animals or whatever. Many who are AFN, they've been living here for 40 years. And we have one way in and one way out. And we had another way that was an access, and Republic Services is trying to close it by building the dump over the top of the road. We have, we have one way, and the one way, everyone in the valley says no one will use it because it goes over the top of Vineyard Mountain through McDonald Forest and P.E. Arboretum, and it's treed the whole way. It's not, in terms of fire, it's not an access route. So my whole idea for being here is to listen to you talk about signs aren't going to do it. Everbridge isn't going to do it. Nixle and fire warnings, not everybody has those, because out here, cell phone service is spotty at best. So that's why I'm here tonight, is to listen to what you have to say. Putting a sign up and telling us we can go this way isn't going to do it. We did an evacuation last year. We got about half the people out, and people tried really hard. They hooked their trailers up and everything to figure out how this was going to happen. And it didn't happen well. And if something were to happen on the north end of Corvallis in the woods, it's pretty clear that we will lose lives. And so that's why I'm here, to see what it is that you have to say, because, I've firewised my property. I've got more to go. We've been firewising out here, but it hasn't burned in 600 years.
Thank you for sharing, Pam. And I think we're all here this evening to come up with solutions. I know DLCD and Susan and Shui and Lisa are here to hear about concerns in the community, hear about potential solutions, hear about what's important to the folks in this room. Thank you for coming. So we've heard a lot of great solutions around statewide planning, local planning, a few around funding, research and partnerships. Do folks have any thoughts on partnerships or research that could be done to help communities prepare better for wildfire? Anything that you've seen work in your communities that you think should be shared?
Yes, it's not something that working in another community, but fellow mountain rescue colleague, he works Eastern Oregon, and he's fire sciences through OSU Extension Service. And he said they're working on a program right now for private property owners to navigate the federal system and be able to appropriate funds for fuels mitigation and prescribed burns on their private property. He was saying, and it sounds like an amazing idea, if the funding is there for private property owners, because, you know, in the frontal ranges, in backcountry too, there are private property owners, and that's really, like the gal from Corvallis is saying, that's where it becomes an issue, is when it involves private property and people's lives. And somehow, if there is funding available for a private property owner through, say, an OSU extension service to appropriate the funds to get somebody to come in and do fuels mitigation properly. I mean, a lot of homeowners can do things, you know, clearing brush, thinning trees, things like that for barriers, but without somebody with the correct knowledge to come to the site and say, okay, this is kind of the plan of action and why we need to do it, and we can help you get the funds to manage it. And my friend John Punches, he said it was something that they're working with right now. Is it's like a separate office they'll have that private property owners concerned with fuels mitigation and prescribed burns can contact them, and they could say, hey, okay, yes, we can navigate this elaborate federal system so that you could get the funding to do what's needed on your property. So I thought that was an excellent idea, really, because I work federal contracts, and it's not easy. It is not easy. It's very intimidating. And most private property owners, they're not going to have $2,000 a day to hire some equipment to come in and do some brush work and thinning trees. They're just not going to have it.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you for sharing. Susan, Wei, and Lisa, is there anything that you've heard in the last few minutes that you'd like to respond to?
Let's see. There are a lot of, well, I'm hearing everyone's concerns, and certainly about risk and evacuation. And in my mind, I'm thinking, about partnerships, because we are also working alongside, 10 other state agencies on this project. And I'm curious about what Rusty was talking about, and if that's something, the Office of State Fire Marshal may be involved with. So I have more questions than things to respond to. And I also think, alternative evacuation routes will be really important moving forward. Those are really, how do we get people out of the communities? I'm curious, Pam mentioned that they've done a lot of work with Firewise in their neighborhood, in their community. And that's certainly something that there are some good examples around the state, and that's a voluntary program that can help folks with their private property. But really, as we get into areas that end up being mapped, with that extreme and high risk, there may be, that's currently voluntary. There may be a future where, we are requiring property owners, public and private, to do this work. And I think that the funding piece will be really important for that part, how that actually is accessible by private property owners.
Yeah, and Pam just added to the chat that ODF will come and help private property owners Firewise their properties. And she was able to get a grant for $600 last year, the first year, but last year was not able to and had to pay out of pocket. So it seems like there's funding somewhat available, but expanding that could be a good solution. And Lisa, I saw that you turned your video back on.
I was just gonna say that I heard a lot of really good comments. I can't emphasize enough how much I agree with the communication challenges and whatever role DLCD can play in that, I'm sure would be beneficial. I like the idea of evacuation routes, but definitely Hoy hit the nail on the head. Fire, unlike a tsunami, is much less predictable, if you can imagine. And then I heard a lot of good comments and around management in general. And so a lot of that's going to be outside of our purview, but it's good that we capture it because we are, working in tandem with other state agencies. So making sure these comments get to where they need to be heard is also, I think, part of our task in this particular process. So I really appreciate people just feeling comfortable enough to talk about a little bit of everything.
Absolutely. And Hoy, did you have anything that you'd like to add?
Not right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Alan, just wanted to make sure that you have an opportunity to speak if you had any solutions that you would like to put out to the group. Oh, you're muted. Oh, can't hear you. But if you do have anything that you would like to share with the group, please use the chat and we'll read it out. Thank you for joining us this evening. So, hi, Chris.
Hello again. 5 minutes left. So just wanted to give you that warning. So hopefully you are close to wrapping things up, and I'll be back to end the breakout room in just a few minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So in the last few minutes, I'd like to talk about some of the solutions. I think Lisa actually did a really good job of summarizing the solutions that we were talking about today that I'll report back out to our group when we exit the breakout rooms and go back together, which is talking about how important evacuation routes, alternate evacuation routes are, as well as communicating both risk and those routes to the public and creating those communication channels, letting folks know what they are, and then also the ability and to do fuels mitigation work that Rusty was discussing and that Pam was talking about, both on private property, but also on public property. Does that capture folks' thoughts on the kind of main solutions we've talked about today? Is there anything I'm missing? All right, well, I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to break, refresh your water, and we'll be back in the main room in, I think, three more minutes. So thank you very much for coming this evening, giving us your thoughts. I look forward to seeing you in the bigger room, and please stay involved in this project.
Well, I think we can get started. Welcome to our breakout room. I'm Libby Bakke with Barney and Worth, and I will be facilitating today. Trish is here with me too, and we both will be taking notes on our discussion board to keep track of all of your ideas. I'm going to share that right now. Let me know if, can you see a discussion board on your screen?
Oh, there was one. Now there's a sunflower.
Oh, no. Okay. How about there? Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. We also have representatives from DLCD in the room. I would invite them to introduce themselves.
Thanks,
Good evening,
Libby.
everybody. I'm Patrick Wingard, Regional Representative with the Oregon Department of Land Conservation Development. Sadie, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Patrick. I'm so glad you're here. Our regional reps are such a critical part of helping solve these problems for us and connecting with local communities. I'm Sadie Carney. I'm not a regional rep, but I hold them in the highest regard. I'm a communications manager and policy analyst at DLCD, and I'm working pretty closely with this project. So thank you so much for being here.
The rules were to raise your hand or use the chat to speak, but we're a small group. And so if you have an idea, bring it up. You can also use chat. If somebody's talking and you want to be next in the queue, please use chat. You can offer suggestions in the chat itself, and we will cut and paste those and put them into the meeting board. We have 35 minutes for brainstorming and 10 minutes reserved for a report back to the larger group. And we, the facilitator, so I will, at the end, we have 5 minutes at the end. I'll collect your best ideas as you determine, and I will give the report back to the larger room for you. Again, we're here to collect your ideas and suggestions about ways to address wildfire risk. Are there any questions? Are we ready to get started?
Ready.
Ready. Okay. So what we have, let me try to get organized here a little bit. What we have is the board. Let me see. Trish, actually, could you pull your board up again? I'll stop sharing. We have a board, the board is divided into the two questions that we were asking, which is how do we protect what we have and how do we plan for growth? If you scoot it over a little bit so you can see the solution buckets that we had discussed, which is statewide land use planning, local comp plans and zoning codes updates, funding and research and partnership. And again, a big area for other solutions that don't fall into those buckets. You don't have to, we'll take notes and try and put them in the right buckets, but you could also direct us if you know what bucket it belongs to. Also our reps are here to help answer questions and help us with the conversation. So with that, I would open it up to people. Hi, Laura.
Hello. Technical difficulties there.
Did you, this is Steve Fitzgerald, did you want to start with either question or just one?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Thank you very much. Yeah, let's start with how do we protect what we have?
Could you clarify, how do we protect what we have is natural resources, housing, everything, people?
Yep, it's everything.
Okay.
It is, but there's different buckets that it could fit in. We're probably not going to find one solution that does it all.
Okay.
And truly, a lot of what is happening in terms of when I think of managing natural resources, my mind often goes to the forest lands when I'm thinking about fire. But there's not a lot we can do to manage in that space that falls within the purview of the Forest Practices Act and the more recently adopted Forest Accord. And so we would be able to take the feedback of reduced fuel loading, but there's not a lot we could do with it. And so
So Sadie, this is Steve Fitzgerald.
Please.
I manage forest land for the College of Forestry, and I get this question from both sides, so I might be able to comment as we go along, being both a manager under forest conservation, but also being impacted. Carolyn knows about this by development that I don't have control over and the impacts that they have on resource lands.
So I think that's a terrific example, Stephen. So if you wanted to maybe explain to the group what you mean when you are talking about the impacts of development on resource lands, I think that could be helpful.
Sure. Okay. And I'll use an example, and Carolyn Mayer, she can chime in too, because she's so this is around Corvallis. We have an area that's 40 acres. It's in the urban growth boundary. It's going to be developed or proposed to be developed under county rules. Maybe 9 or 10 homes could be placed on it, and they probably have to sign a covenant, a restrictive covenant, because it's within 300 feet of a forest conservation zone, which acknowledges the land use on my side of the fence, so to speak. So the issue is, you get people who move out to the forest or move next to a dairy farm, and then they complain about the smell. The idea is to prevent that. I mean, it doesn't prevent it, but at least there's a legal recourse. So, so what we have is a subdivision, and the developer wants to, instead of develop it under county rules, wants to annex it and bring it into the city. The city has I have no way of imposing anything on the city for the developer to consider the impact that has on resource lands, basically on my side. We have worked with the developer to develop a covenant, a restricted covenant between OSU and the developer, but the city, if they annex it in and agree to that, all of a sudden, as a resource manager, I have to deal with all this, I'm going to say crap. Sorry, right? And it wasn't, I wasn't asked. It just happens. And then all of a sudden, I got trails coming from the back of these homes. I've got fire issues, and I didn't ask for it. And there's nothing, the city doesn't have any kind of, and there's nothing with LCDC and through the city code that would make the developer or the city consider what the impact of that development is against resource lands. And I speak about this not just as OSU forest land. It could be another timber owner, and all of a sudden they've got these homes. So that's an issue that within city planning, within the urban growth boundary, there's no consideration of what has to be placed on the developer to mitigate whether it's defensible space or a setback. So that's I'll leave it at that. Carolyn may want to.
Yeah, I would like to add that the problem as I see it is city planning and zoning and fire departments operating in the WUI space and really are being completely clueless about the different risks when you're building adjoining a resource land. County has really strict rules because they understand about the economic consequences. The city doesn't seem to grasp the need for special provisions to protect resource lands, even though the comprehensive plan waxes poetic about the need for buffers between the urban growth boundary and resource lands. So there's a real gap there, and it's a real danger building out into the urban growth boundary all over Oregon, but especially in the Willamette Valley, where we'll probably be considered low risk and won't have access to the tools that are proposed. So I'm concerned about that gap very much for the cities that are quote unquote low risk, as I predict they will be rated.
Philip, you had your hand up.
Oh, before we jump, I just want to make sure, Stephen, or is it Stefan? Stephen. Okay, I just want to make sure that I captured. I'm realizing that I'm trying to translate into concise sticky notes. Can you please restate exactly what your suggestion is?
I think from land use planning currently, if the city annexes, a development in up against resource lands, there is no there is no provision, no covenant, no anything that when they do that, there's no consideration of the impact of that subdivision on resource lands. So forestry, ag, those kinds of things. Even though there are real impacts that I will have to deal with in this case. I mean, people, I harvest timber, I use herbicides, we also have, people in these subdivisions are doing stuff they shouldn't be during fire season, and, I have a risk. And so there's nothing that I can do to impose on city planning codes to ask the developer to develop some kind of mitigation for that development to protect resource lands or protect our property rights, really, when you come down to it.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Philip.
Hi, my name is Philip Calloway. I live in Lynn County. I have 38 acres of woodlands near Crawfordsville. And I wanted to speak about a very similar situation to what Stephen was talking about. They're right next to me. A developer asked to rezone 108 acres. So my property is farm forest. Next to me was 108 acres of farm forest, and a developer wanted it to be rezoned to non-resource 5 acres so that he could build a subdivision. We're 8 miles from the nearest urban growth boundary, and he wanted to build 15 to 20 homes in this area. When we went to the Board of Commissioners and expressed concern about the wildfire risk that would be introduced by this subdivision, they said that, specifically the risk we were concerned about was that every one of those dwellings would be a potential point source for fire. And if any of those landowners were not aware of ODF fire regulations or chose not to follow them, then you've got a fire in the middle of a subdivision that spreads to me, who's right next to the subdivision. And so, fires can be caused by brush pile burning. This is a very rocky area. You can start a fire by mowing. I've done that. I always keep a water tank right next to where I'm mowing. So, I put it out right away, but it's not hard to start a fire by mowing in this area.
So go ahead.
First of all, I don't think we should continue building subdivisions in forested areas 8 miles from urban growth boundaries. But if we're going to continue to do that, I think that we should require a fire break around the periphery of the subdivision. Something like 200 feet, 200-foot fire break around the periphery of the subdivision. In Lynn County, that's the setback next to forest conservation management. So that was why I joined this meeting, was specifically to make that suggestion. So what Stephen was talking about is exactly what I'm talking about too.
Is there anybody? I see Kevin Cook has your hand up. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. Kevin Cook, Multnomah County Land Use Planning. I think some of the things that we've been thinking about in the county, the rural areas, we have some fire safety standards in our commercial forest use zones, but we don't apply, similar standards in other areas that are forested. There might be exception zones, like a rural residential type zone. And so, we're very much looking forward to the mapping, kind of as a guide for us to be able to say, hey, look, we think there should be some fire safety standards in some of these residential zones as well. And just kind of thinking about some of the things that have come up for us, things about, extending the slope of a defensible space, or excuse me, that the area dependent on slope. That's been something that that we have in our code for the forest zones, but there's always these arguments like, oh, where do you draw the line, for the slope and those sorts of things. So I think we could refine that kind of language, and I don't know if DLCD is looking at that kind of thing as well as like some kind of model code.
Kevin, are you saying the slope code exists? It would be something for fire. Is that what you're?
Yeah. So for an example, we'll say if the slope is more than 10%, you have to extend the defensible space accordingly by a certain amount. And then there gets to be these arguments like, well, the building pad is less than 10%, like, of course, right? Like, I mean, it's a level, it's going to be leveled or it's already level. But, really it's, well, what sort of polygon are you drawing on the ground within, say, 30 feet or 50 feet? And how are you measuring that slope, right? Like, people can argue all day about, what's the slope adjacent to the site?
Right. Everyone,
I don't know if there's a model code.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just
That's
wanted
okay.
to let everyone know that we've been in the room for about 15 minutes, so have about another 20 minutes left.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thank you. The other point for us, I think, too, is beyond looking for a model code and the mapping that's coming out, just better coordination will require a defensible space or some kind of fire break per our code around development, and then nobody's checking on those things. And
So you mean coordination with other utilities? So even if you had a defensible space, it would require ongoing coordination to make sure that was being
I'm looking at we'll require it around a structure or a dwelling, and then part of it's our issue. Like, we don't look at it until somebody comes in on that same property for something new, and then that's our opportunity to say, okay, is that fuel break still there? Is it being maintained? And a lot of times, of course not. It's 3 owners later, or somebody who once had the physical ability to maintain their property no longer does. And so better coordination with us and the fire districts, I think, would be very helpful. Obviously, they have the expertise and theoretically, the folks who can check on that on these things on a more rotating basis. So,
Thanks.
So those are just some kind of quick thoughts off the top of my head.
Thank
you.
I think Dennis, do you have your hand up in the?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I mean, I'm new to all of this. I just want to point out the aspect of approaching natural hazards. It seems to me that there is architectural building aspect of creating resilience in that aspect, or the ecological, addressing the natural hazard from an ecological perspective. So I would just suggest about the social aspect of addressing resilience in the community, along as the ecological mean addressing the forest area where these subdivisions are going to be built or planned to be built, and addressing the architectural aspect of building something to make the whole approach also resilient. So I'm just wondering if in this aspect, then the term of resilience is an outcome or is a process to in preventing fires and involving all the stakeholders affected by the disasters, natural hazards, not natural hazards.
Mhm.
That's everything I have to say.
All right, thank you. Does anybody, are you ready, Stephen?
Yeah, yes. So here's a different tack, and this is one that I received. So imagine you're Philip Callaway, and that subdivision goes in, and they, the homes go in, and all of a sudden they start looking at Philip's property, and they go, "Hey, Philip, hey, you're putting our property at risk. You should do something about it."
That's already happened, Stephen. They've already said that to me.
So same here. So I have around the McDonald Research Forest, I have 800 people that live within 1,000 feet. You can imagine if everyone said, "Hey, OSU, you need to do something to protect my property." First of all, I didn't create the value at risk. And the burden's been placed on me, or people are placing the burden on me. I have one homeowner who just constantly is barraging me. Now, about fuel. Wait, let me just finish.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
Yep, no, I was just gonna ask you a question.
So resource property, whether it's Phil's or mine, we have different objectives. And I do fuel reduction where I can. And in fact, the subdivision that we talked about, I'm actually doing some, not even before the subdivision was there, but we manage land. So I have research that goes on, and I just can't go and do a fuel reduction project because someone next door wants me to do it. It's an erosion of really property rights in many ways, and then when I tell them that, they get indignant about it. And so I just want to
so some of the things we're hearing tonight in summary is that it sounds like it'd be helpful if there were something in land use. It sounds like it's local that would help reduce these conflicts between neighbors in these lands, so that there's a set of expectations about fire safety and resiliency.
Correct. So like going back to the subdivision example, even if I get a restrictive covenant and do that with the developer, it doesn't end my work. That is, those people can still write the dean, the president of OSU, and say, "Hey, you need to do something," and they do. All right. But when I remind them that they live in a wildfire prone zone and they signed a covenant, there's a different kind of conversation. I rarely do that, but the covenant gives me some as a backstop, but it's what is expected.
Right.
And this could be against any kind of forest owner, not just OSU or Phillips Place. It could be a Starker Forest. It could be a Hampton Timber Company, other forest owners. We didn't create the land use problem.
Yeah.
In the homes that are out there. So
Understood. I wanted to share Carolyn in the chat said that also in land use planning, no one appears to be looking at structure to structure distance in a similar way as defensible space, like vegetation. There are new studies that show minimum and ideal spacing of structures based on fire behavior to improve chances of structure survival. Carolyn, did you want to say something more about that?
Well, yeah, and it goes along with what I said before about how it goes along with how far away homes have to be from the forest if they're built in the forest because of ignition risk. And if you're building a subdivision of homes 20 feet apart next to a forest in the WUI, not only are you risking the forest, but if the homes are that close together, you risk the entire neighborhood and whatever neighborhood adjoins it, Because if there isn't sufficient distance between the homes, and it's not just a WUI, I mean, we've seen the urban fires. And the problem with this is it conflicts with the housing mandates. So, I mean, the science is very clear. It's just that it's conflicting with other priorities. And I don't know how you get around that.
I did want to also, thank you, Carolyn. I did also want to clarify. So it looks like this is these ideas maybe are a mix of how we protect what we have, which is this defensible space and code updates. Could we spend a few minutes talking about how do we plan for growth in areas, you know, where a subdivision or some other development doesn't exist currently?
Well,
is it already in the urban growth boundary or not?
Yeah.
Well, I think, Stephen, that's a great question, because thinking about this from DLCD, there's kind of a couple different ways that we're thinking about this. So there is rural residential development that is outside an urban growth boundary. We just heard an example of a developer wanting to change non-resource to NR5, rural residential 5. That's not uncommon. But then there's also the challenge for if you're a city and you're looking at this wildfire risk map and you're saying, well, gosh, I've got a lot of bad choices here in terms of where to grow. How do we maintain that opportunity for cities? Or do we tell cities that if you have good and bad places to grow, you've got to choose the good one? There's trade-offs probably there too, because we're talking about, the conversion of resource land. And so there's a lot to think about, but when I think about it, I think about it in terms of new development in a rural space, be that a farm dwelling, a forest parcel dwelling, all of those different ways you can get dwellings on resource land under current DLCD rules. I think about rural residential development, and I think about cities planning for growth, whether it be an undeveloped area inside a UGB that is going to be a new, kind of planned community, or UGB expansion. So those are, I know that's a big topic. Some hands up, so that's good.
Yeah, Philip?
Yes, I just wanted to say, I don't know how the wildland urban interface maps are going to come out. I don't know how the fire risk classification maps are going to come out. I'm very concerned that being here in the Willamette Valley, that I'm not going to be in either one, or maybe I'm in the wildland urban interface, but not in the 2 highest fire risk classifications, and no defensible space is going to be required. I'm guessing that maybe the 2 highest fire risk zones are going to be Southern Oregon and Eastern Oregon. But anyway, I'm very concerned that, I was level 2 during the Holiday Farm fire. It was right there, so something needs to be done in my area too. And somebody said something earlier about counties being very aware of how to handle wildfire risk. Well, that is not true in Lynn County. All they required for this subdivision that was approved next to me was that it was in a rural fire protection district. That's it. And they had a Lynn County report saying that this area was high fire risk. And their only requirement was that it was in a rural fire protection district. So I'll let other people speak.
Yeah, Carolyn, did you have your hand up? You had another comment, or is your hand up from last time?
I think it's up from last time, and whatever it was, I was listening so hard to Phil that it's gone. So,
okay.
But I agree, but I have to say, I agree entirely with what Phil is saying, and I, in fact, am meeting with Dan Rayfield tomorrow morning about this exact topic. And that's the fear that the Willamette Valley will be left out hanging to dry, so to speak, when it comes to being provided the tools that we need to protect our communities because the wildfire risk maps are, as I understand it, mostly based on history. And that will give cities who aren't motivated to deal with it the excuse to not deal with it further. And so, not to be cynical, but that's what I expect.
Kevin?
Yeah, thank you. You know, it may exceed the scope of, you know, this work, but you know, I think about things like areas that are subject to multiple hazards. You know, then you layer in goal 5 and resource and habitat protection. And you start to see a pattern like how much more sort of, you know, penetration into the, you know, forest canopy should we be sort of allowing, especially subdivisions, but, you know, also single family dwelling, like with a, you know, mile-long driveway or something. I mean, at some point, I think we're just sort of layering, you know, multiple issues on, you know, and we can look at it through a wildfire lens. We can look at it through, you know, vehicle miles traveled. You can look at it through so many different lenses. But you kind of come to the same answer after a while. And it's like, let's, you know, to some degree, I think we're doing it right here in Oregon. I mean, we've got an urban growth boundary. We're saying, you know, most of the housing belongs in the urban growth boundary. But, you know, maybe we should look at, you know, starting with just a multiple hazards lens, right? Like where should we say, you know, for the most part, these are off limits to putting people in harm's way. So just
That's
kind of
interesting,
a
Kevin,
rant
that-
more than anything, I suppose.
That goes back to what you were saying. We have 5 minutes?
5 minutes left. Yep. Sorry to interrupt
Yeah.
again, but yeah, well, 5 minutes left. So I guess start wrapping things up.
Okay, Kevin, now back to what you had said earlier about slope. So it's areas that have layers of hazards to it that you're talking about. Taking a look at the benefit risk statement for those areas. Yeah. I wanted to make sure we do wrap up and summarize some of the top issues and solutions. I do want to make sure that other people who are on this call that we haven't heard from, if they have anything that they'd like to say or weigh in.
Also, please, if you don't want to speak up, or if we don't have time, please feel free to drop your comments in the chat and we'll capture them with the notes for this meeting. But I do see that Stephen has his hand up. I don't know if we have time for one more, Libby.
Yeah, I want to go back
one
to
more, and
the,
I just want to make sure I summarize.
yeah, I
Please
just want to go
go.
back to the idea of, I can't remember who brought it up, but is this a good area to develop or not, you know, within the urban growth boundary? That needs to be determined way ahead of time before it's actually considered to be brought into urban growth boundaries. So for example, the property that I was mentioning, Carolyn is involved with, is that it's probably a piece that, because of oaks and other habitats, it probably shouldn't have been considered, right? But to buy that, say for open space, we're too late and too short. You know, the developers moving ahead or potentially moving ahead if it's approved, and nobody could buy that in such a short period of time to offset the value that the developer, or in this case, the owner, even before it gets to development. So this idea of maybe a different kind of a screen of what you bring into the urban growth boundary based on these things that we've been talking about: fire, habitat, watershed protection. There should be something there so that you're developing where you probably should. Not everything probably should be developed for these other reasons. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yep, thank you very much. So to summarize, this discussion today has been about, or this evening has been about areas of growth in wildfire area, high risk areas. Also other hazards. So considering wildfire and other hazards as a whole, planning ahead to reduce conflicts between existing and future residential areas, thinking about going enough time for planning. So when you're doing urban growth boundary expansions, you're considering where the best places there are to grow before somebody has submitted a land use application for a residential development per se. Is there anything that I'm missing that you would like me to highlight?
I think you did a great job, Libby. I've captured a few of the more specific like numbers and stuff that people were sharing in terms of setbacks or fire breaks, things like that. So those are reflected in my notes, but I think that was a good summary.
Are there any other issues? It was interesting that this discussion started and took off describing what the issues were. So personal stories about how this has impacted property owners and resources, and are there any other issues that this DLCD should be considering, even if there's not a solution set for it, but if you think more broadly? Not more broadly, just if there's other things that issues you think should be addressed. Oh, we have a comment here in chat. It says, instead of talking about where it is okay to build and where it is not, maybe require mitigation. For example, if you're going to allow development within or by areas of risk, then those areas must be treated or managed a certain way to reduce the risk, like fuel reduction. And I think that's where we had been talking about coordination needs for that. Is that right, Stefan, Kevin?
Yeah, thank you. That's from me. I'm the executive director of the Lane Council of Governments, and we provide planning services not only in Lane County, but across the state, including helping with the rebuilding in the Holiday Farm fire. And it just seems to me, instead of, you know, this, but not this, this or this, we should find a way to meet in the middle.
All right, welcome back to the big room. That time went by really fast. Yeah. Kim, do you want to do your report back?
Sure, I will. We had a couple themes that came through very strong when talking about solutions. One was around better communication with folks in the communities, both about their evacuation routes as well as the risks that are present, and then better communication during a wildfire emergency about how to exit and evacuate their community. We talked a lot about alternate evacuation routes and how important those are to establish for some communities that only have one exit route. And then also talked about fuels mitigation on private and public property, the onus that puts on private property owners, how expensive it can be, and possible solutions and partnerships to fund that type of work. Susan, you were in our room. Was there anything I missed, or is that capture?
That was great. I think overarching, yeah, communication and collaboration and partnerships were all important themes.
Thank you. Libby, what did your group talk about?
Well, our group focused on new development in wildfire risk areas, the interface and impacts to current residents that are living there and kind of understand the fire risk, and new developments that come in where there's really no requirements for residents to understand or learn about it, the fire risk to residential areas and resources, the need, interesting to think about it, but the need for, even with land use, state or local code changes, there's still a lot of ongoing coordination that's needed between agencies to make sure that everything is being carried out by landowners to ensure that they're safe. I think there was a interesting discussion about how wildfire is linked to other natural hazards like slope, and that maybe it should not be, it could be looked at more globally, like property that has multiple layers of hazards on that could be considered. So the need for codes, but also the need to have a far-reaching look at going back into when you're deciding through urban growth boundary expansions, where the best places will be. And then I would like to call, we had, Sadie might have something to add, but Brenda Wilson, if I could just, you were saying something very interesting when we left, and we have some time, so I thought maybe you could just finish up what you're saying, because I thought it was a nice summary to our discussion. Oh, and you're on mute. We had to unmute you, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Livy. My name is Brenda Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of the Lane Council of Governments. And as I was saying, we provide planning services, not just in Lane County, but across the state to public agencies. And we are also helping with the rebuilding efforts in the Holiday Farm Fire area. And so, my agency does a lot of bringing together people to the table. And what I heard and what I hear all the time is it's either or, right? It's got to be, you can build here, but you can't build here. And I think we just need to have a different conversation about, okay, well, we understand that there are some places that are not, that present more risk than other places. So how do we allow development in those areas at the same time mitigating the risk, rather than just saying the risk can be mitigated only by not allowing building or development or by creating some sort of space or something like that. And maybe there are other mitigation ideas that we can talk about so that development and risk can coexist. And I think we need to have that conversation. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to butt heads. And I don't think that's very productive.
Thank you, Brenda. Sadie, thank you very much, Brenda. Sadie, do you have anything that we missed?
No, but I'm so glad you invited Brenda to finish her comments, because I have like an urgent note to myself to follow up with her if I didn't get to hear what she had to say. And I think that really her comments land for me, really the way that I would like to see our recommendations advance. I mean, we have a pretty good reputation at DLCD for telling people what they can't do and where they can't do it. But I think that a balancing act is really what we need moving forward. And I like the way that she captured it as development and risk, and sort of like living with both of those things and understanding their relationship to each other and the trade-offs that we're making. So thank you for those comments, Brenda. And I would just say, in our conversation, one of my favorite things that came up is at DLCD, we often talk about land use conflicts. So that's like where your neighbor is a farmer and he's plowing up his fields and the dust is coming all over your car and your house and your kid's birthday party, something like that, right? That's a land use conflict. Like, why are you living next to this farm, but why is that farmer plowing at my kid's birthday party? And someone mentioned a process for conflict resolution between resource lands and development. And so I just like the idea of conflict resolution instead of just land use conflicts. So I just appreciated all the comments. Thank you.
All right, that sounds great. We will move on to the next part of the presentation. But we do want, if you have other ideas or you heard anything or you've been thinking about this some more, please put more comments and suggestions into the chat. We would really appreciate that. With that, I think I'm turning it over to you, Susan.
Sure.
Oh, and then actually, sorry, it's Sadie.
That's okay. We can tag team. Yeah.
Okay, tag team. Yeah. So next slide, Tammy.
Thank you. So this is an outline of our community outreach and reporting process that we are following to sort of fulfill our obligations under Senate Bill 762. And just to be very clear, with this group, as we are with everyone, we're not making land use changes at this time. We're developing recommendations to share with the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council and the legislature, which you see here by the October 1st deadline. And then we kind of see where it goes. But you can see in between now and then we have our community listening sessions. We have a stakeholder group that we will be convening shortly to take the ideas that we have heard in these community listening sessions and refine them and sort of maybe elaborate on them. We will be delivering a draft of our report or recommendations to LCDC. At the 2 stars, you can see we're going to deliver a draft at their July meeting, which falls near the end of the month, and then again at their September meeting. And then they will give us their stamp of approval, and we will advance it to those groups I was talking about earlier, the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council and Legislature. So that is our process. As Susan mentioned, we do have some tribal consultations going on. We're inviting, tribes are welcome and willing to, welcome to participate at any point during this process. And we're happy to take their feedback, but it's kind of a separate process from these. I don't think I missed anything there that I was gonna say.
There's a question in the chat. Have the stakeholder committee been formed?
The stakeholder group is what we're calling it. And we do have people, but I believe that Susan might be willing to accept additional interest, and we can see what we have. I don't know, Susan, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth.
Well, we have about 30 people on our stakeholder group, and we have folks from across the state. We had an open application process, and then we found that there were some kind of viewpoints and perspectives that were missing. So we've reached out to some additional organizations. But I think we're open. The stakeholder group will start meeting in May, and also I will note that those meetings will be open to the public. And we'll have an opportunity for folks, to make public comment. And again, this group is, they're not making decisions, but they will be wrestling with some tough topics. When we're talking about balancing development and risk, I think that will be a big topic for this group, because we have folks really concerned about community safety and folks who, are really more on the development side, and how, in the forest industry and farm industry, and folks from communities that were impacted in the 2020 fires. We also have local and county planners and some elected officials. So we have a lot of viewpoints, which is a long way of saying that you're welcome to follow up with me if you are interested in the group. And as Sadie mentioned, we also, with our Land Conservation and Development Commission, those are also opportunities for public input. Those meetings, there's public comment and opportunity for written comment. And I see Philip's question as well. Yes, so those stakeholder group meetings, they will be available for streaming, and then through this process. So as we have summaries from our listening sessions, that information will really be very important for the stakeholder group to discuss and consider. And our summary will be available on our website as well. And as we go through this process, we really want to be proactive with keeping folks informed how the process unfolds. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to visit our website, and maybe we can, well, I don't want to forget, we'll go to the next slide in a minute, but and you can sign up to be on our listserv through GovDelivery. And then also don't want to forget to mention, there is a survey that will be available and a virtual open house. So we'll also have more information that folks can access through August. So we'll continue to take that input, or maybe through July. I should check on that.
Oh, Susan, I'd like to say that everybody who has registered to attend these meetings will get an email from DLCD about the community survey and the open house when that's live.
When it's like, oh, perfect. Thank you, Libby. Great.
And I'll just close with a few more thoughts because I kind of pitched that to you out of the blue, Susan. My apologies. To Philip's question about what we will be able to view online as the process unfolds. So that is a great question, and also one that I think DLCD is eagerly anticipating the answer to, because the view on this map is really going to, I think, change the conversation for a lot of people, because we're gonna, it's kind of gonna be who's in, who's out, right? We're gonna know where the WUI is, we're gonna know where high and extreme are, and we are kind of operating absent, well, we are operating absent that knowledge until June 30. And so with that in mind, and with the charges that other state agencies have, so Susan mentioned some of those at the top of the meeting. So the Oregon State Fire Marshal is working on developing standards for defensible space. The Building Codes Division is adopting a building hardening standard. So we are getting together some of these natural resource and other invoked agencies under Senate Bill 762 and trying to coordinate our communication at the direction of the Wildfire Programs Director. And so hopefully we will have some common language, some fact sheets, some schedules that show folks that are interested who's doing what, where and when you can participate, how you can participate, what the different deadlines are, because 762 is pretty complicated. And then finally, I just wanted to let this group know that kind of concurrent to these community listening sessions, it is budget development season at DLCD. And probably you think that doesn't matter, but we are putting together a budget request that is specific to further wildfire funding, further funding, more staff at DLCD to help take on the challenges of minimizing or reducing wildfire risk for our communities. And I will find that link and I will drop it in the chat before this meeting ends. I have just a high-level summary document of those budget development requests. But if you would like to offer feedback on any of those or share your suggestions with us on something that we might have missed in our descriptions, we're happy to hear feedback there as well. I just also want to acknowledge, I know we ask a lot of our community in terms of gathering your feedback, and we are so appreciative of the time that you spend with us and your willingness to take hours out of your evening to do this. So no pressure to look at my budget development document, but if one is curious, I will drop that link in the chat. And then Susan, I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
And I just put it in the chat, Sadie. So
oh, you did.
I did.
Thank you.
And then I also am happy to put in my contact information. So feel free to reach out if you have questions.
Next slide, Tammy.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So this is where we get to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to participate in tonight's community listening session. We really do truly appreciate your input and the conversations we had. And, stay engaged by signing up for emails through our Gov delivery. And we'll keep this project moving forward, and have a great evening.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.